Joining us today, we have author, human performance coach, and president of New Edge Performance, John Haime. John, how are you doing today, sir?
Kyle, I am doing pretty well. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Sun is shining out there, so that's got to count
Love
for
it.
something, right?
It's hot, Kyle.
Oh my God.
What's going on in Canada these days? Is global warming or what is it?
Well, this heat wave there, it's making me very thankful that I have a pool. Let's just put it that way. My daughter's in there about 2 or 3 times a day at this point, so she's going to be more fish than human by the time the summer wraps up. But
Yes, I'm envious of people who have pools, and I'm certainly grateful that we have air. But I also feel bad for people who may not have air. This has got to be some people, I'm sure, are suffering, which is not great in this weather.
yeah. But I mean, obviously, heat waves aside here, let's talk a little bit about what you do and the reason we brought you on, because you've got a very
Yeah, sure.
interesting profession here, right? Like, I think a very basic point that bears exploring a little bit is people understand, what a personal trainer is, what a strength and conditioning coach is, because they can physically see people throwing weights around and doing sit-ups and all of that. When they hear the term, though, human performance coach or sports psychologist or anything like that,
Yeah.
they gets a little bit gray. So, like, what does a typical session with you and a client even look like?
Well, first of all, let's back up just a fraction here. So when you have, and let me sort of uptake on a few of the things you said there. So in a human performance model, there's basically four key areas. Some people add more to it, but I look at it as a sort of a four-pronged approach. So you have the technical part, and that's what you're talking about when you're throwing weights around and that sort of thing. Then you have the physical part, and that could be sort of the same thing, throwing the weights around in the gym, the building of the physical muscles. And then there's usually the strategic, sometimes the tactical piece where you need to understand what you're doing as from a performance perspective. So if you're playing hockey, do you understand the game? Do you know where to be at what times and those sorts of things? So there's those three pieces that are really important. Then you have this piece sort of, you could put it at the top, you could put it at the bottom, you could put it wherever you want, but it's the mental and the emotional piece. And it's a driver of the other pieces. Now, is it more important than the others? I would say no, it's not more important than the others. I think they're all equally important. So we give them all 25%. If you're not technically proficient, you're going to struggle. If you're not physically proficient, you're going to struggle. If you don't understand what you're doing or understand the game per se, you're going to struggle. But there's this mental and emotional piece that drives the other pieces. And every single professional athlete, certainly that you talk to, will tell you how important it is. Many will use, and it's arbitrary, right? A number. So it could be, is it 90% of the game? Is it, once you get to a certain level, is it 90%? Is it 75? Is it 50? They'll use all sorts of numbers, but I will tell you that that number is quite high. So, but if you do ask the people who are at the top of the sports or who are playing at an elite level, they will tell you how important the mental and the emotional piece is, because ultimately it will become the separator. When people first start playing a sport, the mental and the emotional part probably isn't as important, because you need to have some technical and physical and strategic proficiency, right, to get to a certain level and actually even do it. A golfer, if you don't have any technical skill, you can't hit the balls. So the mental and the emotional piece is probably not quite as important, but it becomes more important as you go. So, and you're completely right, Kyle. The part of the problem is why people don't work on it. And every single, trust me on this, every single athlete needs to work on this. It's basically building skills. It's developing yourself as an athlete. It's super important to develop those skills, because like I said, as you move up, you have to have those skills and be able to have the knowledge of how to apply them to what you're doing. So you're right, you can't see it. And most athletes have no idea of how to develop the skills too. That's part of the problem. The other part of the problem too is that an athlete, when they feel like they have to work on this, they feel like sometimes there's something wrong with them, which is way, way wrong, because it's a skill. It's not clinical psychology. This is building skills to elevate your performance and maximize your abilities. That's what it's all about. And there's a way to do it. So we've spent, I mean, I started in corporate many years ago, and because I played professional sports myself, I transferred into, or I guess I transitioned into doing both. And we even work in entertainment now too, because entertainers need performance skills. So I get my background from playing a professional sport. When I was younger, I played professional golf, and then I transitioned into coaching executives up to the CEO level. And then we transitioned back a little bit because of what we were learning in corporate, how to elevate the performance of the CEO, the executives, sales managers, everybody in the organization. Really helped us understand how to elevate the performance of athletes.
Yeah.
So that's sort of how I started into it. Like, and it's all customized too. Like you're mentioning, like, what do you do with an athlete? Well, it's all customized based on what they need. And we always start with, and we're probably getting into other questions here, but I'll just talk about it a little bit. Might as well, right? It really is all about. It becomes all about at the very base, at the very foundation. If you're building the house, it's the foundation. A lot of it is about the athlete understanding themselves. It's about self-awareness. It's about self-discovery. And if an athlete can understand, their strengths and their limitations and their triggers and what their emotional makeup and many other pieces, their purpose, their values, all these pieces that we structure and we help build with athletes, then that's the starting point. From there, you can build other things: confidence, resilience, focus, all these things you typically hear about around mental and emotional, or building these mental and emotional muscles. So the book I just wrote actually is on confidence. And I find that confidence is a big deal. Like there's a lot of pieces attached to it: the pressures, the comfort zone, fear, all these things are attached to confidence. So that's why I wrote the book, the latest book. But to answer your question super simply, every athlete is different and we work on different things with all of them, but they all work within a basic structure, and we start sort of in the same place with all of them: building the self-discovery piece, building the self-awareness piece. Once you have that, then there's opportunity to move forward and build these other pieces and build these other skills. So sorry for the long answer, but and some of my answers might be long because I'll keep moving forward into other questions. But that's basically it. It's fascinating, Kyle. The mental and the emotional piece is really fascinating because you can't see it, and it can make such a massive difference. Like I just posted an Instagram thing today, and one of the top riders in the country is reading the book and came back to me and said, "This is making a massive difference." Like, she's a great rider already. She has the technical skill, she has the physical skill, she understands the sport. But now she's sort of starting and touching on the mental and emotional thing and saying, wow, it's elevating the other pieces too and elevating my riding. So all that being said, it's important for people out there listening. If you have a young athlete, it's really important you get on this and develop the skills.
Yeah. And obviously, lots to unpack with that answer there.
Oh,
And
yes.
we'll
Yes.
deep dive a few points that you brought up there in a little bit more detail. But I mean, one of the ones that you did mention, though, was a bit of a hesitancy for some athletes to even address the mental side of the game. But like you were saying there, that they think that there's something wrong with them, and they think they're going to be, lying on a psychologist couch or something.
Right. No, that's not it.
Yeah. What are all the harms from your childhood that will deep dive? And that's not it at all. But if we look at it from just sort of a macro perspective, obviously there's been huge advances in the last 10 to 20 years of sports psychology and performance and all of that. But we're still really just scratching the surface. So when you are working with an athlete, like, where do you think that hesitancy stems from? And what are some of the main hurdles you need to maybe overcome when you are just getting to know a new client or a new athlete that you need to address before you can start even getting to the mental sides of the game there?
Well, yeah, that's why communication, like if I hire somebody, for example, to work in our company, communication is massive. You have to be able to connect with the person and the individual. That might be the number one thing. And you have to establish the trust. Obviously, they expect you to know what you're doing, but it's really important that you connect with them in that trust factor. Now, part of the problem, like you were talking about, is there's a stigma around psychology. You don't usually go to a psychologist if things are going well, do you? So there's a stigma around that. So I try to distance myself from that certainly a little bit, and focus on the performance piece, so the human performance piece, because ultimately, when somebody comes to me, whether it's a young athlete, whether it's a professional athlete, whether it's the parents and the athlete, they want to improve performance. They want to get to the next level. They want to get that scholarship. They want to get to the pros. They want to just maximize their abilities. So we try to stay away. So there's a bit of a stigma, like you said, around that, saying that, oh my God, John, I'm going to see John. There must be something really wrong with me. But there's nothing wrong with you, because we're building skills. That's what we're doing. We're building skills, like you get on the ice and like if it's hockey, you're building your skating skills and your shooting skills. You're building all those skills all the time. Mm-hmm. So think about that. If you're not building one of the pieces of the performance model, which is, we're calling it the fourth piece or the first piece, whatever you want to call it, you need to build all of them, and you need to work at it. You can't just build the technical skills and the physical skills and the strategic skills, leave the other one alone. At some point, you're probably going to run out of road and need help to build those skills. That's why I'm always encouraging, Kyle, people to do it early. Like, just put that in as part of your performance model, build it in, gain some skills. Do you need tons of skills? Probably not, but you need the basics. And then you can kind of maybe find your way a little bit. In my job, what I try to do, Kyle, is if an athlete, let's say they work with me for a year, a pro athlete works with me for a year, we have a program we put the athlete through, building all the skills. And then it's my job to make them independent so that they don't need me anymore. Mm-hmm. So that when they do run into problems, then they can help themselves and they can fix it themselves, and they know what to do because they know themselves so well. So that's always my ambition, is to create an independent, confident athlete, and with great skills, so that they can support themselves and they understand all the pieces that are important. So yeah. That's what I do.
Yeah, and you just touched on an interesting point there too, because I mean, as everyone knows, the earlier you can start building these skills, the better. But I'm just curious, in your experience, is there sort of a sweet spot in terms of age where the athlete is able to grasp the concepts and actually implement them themselves? And, is it like 16 years old? Like, when should parents really start thinking about, all right, we got to get Timmy or Susie involved in the mental side of things, because they're now at an age where they can implement what John is talking about in those sessions themselves?
Yeah, no, I totally get it. Well, we have just to simply answer that question, we have this online program that a lot of athletes use, a lot of high school athletes and that sort of thing. And it's 12 weeks. It's an introduction to the mental and the emotional piece. Okay, why should I do this? Here's what it's all about. And here's 10 modules of little pieces that will be important to you moving forward. So it's a good intro. And I always recommend that parents buy the program for athletes over, I would say about 13 is a good, but it's hard sometimes because you have some 12-year-olds that are really mature. Like often the female athletes mature more quickly than the boys. The boys are distracted.
Not just athletes. I think it's women in general mature quicker.
I think so. Yeah, definitely. And the boys are distracted sometimes. That it's hard at that age, and it's hard to pay attention and that sort of thing. So I would say, and sometimes it's up to the athlete too. Some kids are really driven and they say, "I want this." They could be 12 or 13 or 14. And others, I'm not sure about this. And so I would say probably 13, like 14 is a good time to start really embedding the ideas and the skills. Anything before that is a little difficult. Like people ask me, well, what should I do before that? Well, just make sure that it's fun. Mm-hmm. that it's fun and there's no pressure, and they're doing it because they love it, because that's why you introduce them to the sport or the game in the first place, is because it's fun and it's something they love to do, right? It's not work, it's a passion. So just make sure it's always fun. Then when they get into maybe a little bit more competition, it becomes a little bit more competitive, then you might start looking at, okay, let's build some skills. And Kyle, come on, what an unbelievable, I just wrote an article for an equestrian magazine the other day, and what an unbelievable opportunity to develop these skills, because these are a lot of the similar skills I work with executives.
Mhm.
Like this is, and so you can have an athlete who's highly interested in a sport, and get them to build these skills around their passion, which is sport. And it's not even like work or education. It's like, okay, John's going to give you a couple little things to work on here, and they integrate it into this fun environment and their passion. And what could be better than that? I mean, you get the skills early, and now you have them when you get to these levels where you actually need them.
Mhm.
So
It's the
yeah.
classic teach them without them realizing they're being taught.
Hey, exactly. I love it. With a bit of sugar, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you work with athletes across a wide variety of sports, but just in general, like, do you find that athletes who come from, let's say, an individual sport like a golf, like a tennis, where you are the only person out there and you are solely in control of the outcome of your result,
Yep.
can benefit from the mental side of training a little bit more than, say, a team sport athlete where you are one of 53 people on an NFL roster? Like, is there a difference in how you tailor fit those approaches?
Yeah, maybe a little bit, but you know what? Now, certainly in the professional sports, there's a lot of coaching around the mental and the emotional piece in the team environment. So, but not so much, obviously, in the other environment. You have to hire somebody to help you in the individual environment. But from a perspective of skills and from a perspective of things like self-awareness, self-confidence, focus, resilience, you need them equally in every sport. In a team environment, you're an individual, you're just playing a role in a sport, on a team. So, but you still need the skills equally as much as the golfer would, or the tennis player would, or the equestrian would, or the squash player would. So in answering your question, what's more important, it's equally important in both. And you have other things to deal with too on a team. You have the social pieces too, which we kind of get into, whereas in the individual sports you don't have as much as that. So when you look at a model sort of emotions, or being smart about your emotions, emotional intelligence, there's these social pieces too that you have to pay attention to when you're in a team environment, where you don't have to really pay as much attention to them in the individual environment. So yeah, yeah, trust me, it's equally important in both. You need the skills in both for sure to be able to adapt to the challenges that the sport presents to you.
Absolutely. And obviously, a huge sporting event just wrapped up there. We had the Olympics, the Paralympics are going on right now, but athletes at that level of sport are really creatures of habit, from their pregame
Yep.
meal to the routine to how they get to the arena and what time they're showing up for warm-ups, like all of that. Now, talk about a curveball of all curveballs getting thrown their way here. Limitations on who could even come over. Some events had fans, some were closed events. So really throwing them out of their comfort zone. Like, if you were coaching, let's say, an Olympian who had their big event, something they've been training their entire life to get up to this point, and they phoned you and they said, "Hey, John, like, I don't know what's going on here. Like, all the things I normally do are out of whack." Like, what are some things that you would be telling them to really focus on? And you think that maybe some of the Olympians we did see perform really well at the latest Olympics in Tokyo maybe took advantage of that their competitors didn't?
It's always in sport. I mean, that's a very complicated question. That's another podcast
Yeah.
almost, right? We could go on and on about that, because to unpack that question, there's a lot of pieces to that question. But it has been, first of all, it has been very difficult because there has been so many curves thrown at the athletes, and it's been very unusual. They haven't been able to train as much. So those lead to little issues too around confidence, because training is connected to confidence. How much you train, how well you train is directly connected to your confidence. So that's a thing. That one's another podcast too. That particular one I just mentioned. But obviously when you're doing anything in performance, you're always trying to focus on the process of doing it, yourself and the process of doing it, and your training. So you're trying to maximize your training. Now, athletes go over there and they have to know, what they're going to do, what the plan is, and what they're capable of. If you're a runner, for example, who has never finished better than 10th in a world event, and your training has been good, and your record time would be 10th in the world, having expectations that you're going to go to the Olympics and win a medal is a little out of the question. It's not going to happen probably, unless you get an engine motor pack on your back or something like that, right? So you have to be real with some stretch in that when you go to the Olympics. So you know what you're trying to do. You go there. It's all about you. It's all about your process. It's all about your training. And then, because we've worked with them on the foundational pieces, we ground them in their values and their purpose, why they're doing it. So we always pull them back to that too. Why are you even running? Like, why do you run? And then really ground yourself and focus on that versus the many, many distractions that there could be around the Olympics. Definitely, I had some athletes call me prior to the Olympics, and it is nerve-wracking. But when you can kind of pull them back into the structure and into the purpose and into their values, what's important to them, and then get them only focusing on, okay, why are you there? Well, you're there to enjoy the bloody thing, first of all, because you just spent 4 years trying to get there. So let's enjoy it a little bit, enjoy the experience, and then focus on, certainly, it's always focusing on your own process of how you do things, your own routines, like you talked about habits, everything's about habits. So you focus on your own habits, what you do every day. This is getting back to the whole 10th place and medals and all that. You don't have to do anything special. Like, go over there and do what you do every day. And that's why you're there. You were chosen to go to the Olympics because you met certain standards. So go over there and do what you do every day, and try to enjoy the experience as best you can. And then if you have panic attacks, call me, right? And we'll ground you in your purpose and your values, and we'll create some perspective around it and bring you back to where you need to be to maximize your abilities. But it's all about the athlete getting there, being fairly relaxed, being confident, and then just maximizing their abilities. And the idea always is the personal best. Like, they talk about that in the Olympics. The idea is always trying to extend yourself into the personal best. And that's typically, the most you can possibly do. Now, if you're world class, and trust me on this too, Kyle, like, a lot of the athletes in the Olympics, like at the top levels, are untouchable. Like, they have these genetics, and it's incredible, like the levels they're at. So to try to reach those levels sometimes is not realistic for some athletes. If they go to the Olympics and finish 10th, that's amazing. Like, think about that. You're the 10th best in the world at what you do. Like, that's amazing. But when you put it in the microscope of the Olympics, oh my God, he finished 10th. He didn't win a medal, but they're the 10th best in the world at what they do, and their physical capabilities and all these capabilities are put them in a position to be at that level, which is 10th. The people who are, first, second, third in the Olympics are, almost freakish. Like, they have freakish physical skills. So it's all about just doing what you do. I've written about this lately a lot during the Olympics and before the Olympics. Is you don't have to do anything special. You're good enough. So just go, get relaxed, and do the best you possibly can the day of the event or in the heats or whatever it is, and then and then try to extend just past where you're going in training, which is a personal best. So that's always the goal, to
Yeah.
just try to do that.
Yeah. And I mean, a word that has come up time and time again throughout this interview here has been confidence. Now, not to try and boil the entire field of sports psychology down to one
No, but it's
thing, but
important. It's
right.
important. It's like your bulletproof vest, right? If you're confident and you know you can do it, that's a really good attitude. So
Absolutely.
so
Is
I
that
think it's really
the
important.
most common thing that most athletes struggle with in your experience there? Or is it something else that we maybe haven't even talked about? Like what's the most common thing that an athlete who is seeking out your services is looking to improve upon?
There's a lot of things, but I would say though, you know, let's say an athlete calls me, a pro athlete calls me, or a parent calls me,
Mhm.
and or the parent and the athlete call me like jointly. I would say probably just in the first few minutes of the conversation, the word confidence comes up.
Mhm.
So you'll always hear, I need more confidence. I'm not confident. I'd like to be more confident. I don't really know how to be more confident.
Right.
So my confidence is gone. I hear that too. I don't have any confidence.
Got to pay for the
So
yips.
yes, well, that's not good if you get that. And that's primarily based in psychological challenges. So that's a problem. Do you have the yips? Is that why you're asking?
No, but I mean,
Okay.
if you see me out on the golf course from time to time, you would think that I might. So all of a sudden, a snap hook will pop up out of nowhere. But thankfully, I managed to keep it under control most of the time.
Okay, well, that's good. So anyway, in talking to the athletes and talking to the parents, I would say that that word comes up a lot. So we have to be prepared to address that. And I just wrote the book on confidence for equestrian athletes. I found that literally, I found working in equestrian, probably the last 6 to 7 years, there's a confidence crisis. Like
Mhm.
a lot of people are not as confident as they need to be. And in that particular sport, it becomes doubly important because you're putting emotions into the horse too. And
Mhm.
then you have two performers who aren't performing up to where they need to be. So yeah, I would say that confidence certainly is a big one. It's knowing, right? If you boil confidence down into one word, it's knowing you can do it.
Yeah.
When the time comes for you to do something, it's knowing, like deep in your heart, 100%. It's not a fake confidence. It's 100%. You know you can do it. And there's so much attached to that too. And there's so many threats to the confidence, like, fear and pressure and all these things that you can talk about. And then you need to build it all the time, but you also need to have the foundational piece. Like
Mhm.
if you, for example, with confidence, if you don't know yourself, it's really difficult to believe in that. So if you don't know something, how do you believe in it? So
Mhm.
that's where sort of the self-discovery and the self-awareness and those sorts of important pieces precede confidence. So you get up to speed on those things, and then you have the opportunity to be confident. And then the training is important too. How do you train? Like you need a really really good process to train. If you've got a soft sort of willy-nilly random process of training, then that will show up when you
Mhm.
compete. So you really need a great process of training. That's one of the things we've sort of standardized, is how to do the training relative to the mental, building the mental and the emotional muscles.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, the confidence, yes, it's really key, and you need sort of a process to develop it, and to be able to be aware of what the threats are to it too, right? There's always these things, and you talked about in the Olympics, the distractions and the pressure, and understanding the differences between kind of good and bad pressure. And there's good pressure too. Like if
Mhm.
you can really consume pressure in the right way, you can maximize it and elevate yourself to these personal bests we're talking about. But if you're allowing the pressure to really erode you and erode your skills, because it's bad pressure, then yeah, that's a problem. So things like that, to understand that. And this is all about the mental and the emotional piece, understanding these things. And most people, I don't think, really understand how to get to, a really really super confident level and maintain it. That's
Mhm.
the other thing. It shouldn't come and go. it should be relatively stable, and you should be, sort of always proactively confident. So yeah, it's a good question you're asking. The confidence piece is quite important.
Yeah, and something that you've again brought up, and obviously you've wrote a whole book on it, so we're not going to get the entire answer right here. So for
No,
those
that's
that
more
want the more,
podcasts.
exactly. So for those who want the more in-depth answer, there, go out and buy the book. But you just mentioned like equestrian is such a unique realm because in just about every other sport you're dealing with humans, whereas with this you've got a human and an animal who you cannot communicate with and really coach up or feel, oh, is the horse confident today? Like, it can't tell you these things. So what did you find really were some of the key differences in dealing with equestrian as a sport versus a hockey player, baseball player, whatever, because of the animal factor there? Like, how do you even begin to
Yeah,
navigate that?
it's sort of like, when you break it down, it's sort of the same thing. It means that the athlete has to be good, the rider has to be good, but the rider has to be good for the reason that they're on an animal. The animal, it's incredible how sensitive horses are. They're a herd animal, so when a fly lands on them or any little noise or anything is around them, they pay attention to everything. So
Mhm.
they literally can sense and feel the emotions of the rider. So if you get on that horse and you're fearful, if you have anxiety, if you're hesitating, if you have doubt, if you have any of these things, the horse knows. The horse can feel it. So all of a sudden, those emotions sort of become part of the horse's performance too. So that's why it's so important to get it right as a rider. And that's the reason why I got into the equestrian piece, because I wanted to, number one, help the riders. And because being really good is so important in equestrian, and usually the horse gets all of the credit. It's like, but if you have, I would say, Kyle, if you have a really, really top equestrian, like a professional equestrian, it's 50-50. It's
Mhm.
50 horse, 50 rider. So it's a real partnership. So the rider has to get it right, and the rider has to be really good too. The horse is really the primary athlete, because the horse is going over the fences, or the horse is doing the maneuvers in dressage, or whatever the particular discipline of equestrian sport is. And there's many different disciplines, which was also fascinated me and interested me. Coming from other sports, a lot of the sports are similar, but this sport was so different. It was a real challenge for me, and a fascinating way to do something a little bit different and challenge myself. I took a few riding lessons, like to understand what the riders feel. And I learned from the best in the business and asked a lot of questions and went to clinics and talked to coaches and followed people around and went to the best horse shows in the world and everything too. Um, so I think that's the reason that the rider has to be so good emotionally.
Mhm.
And it's just a difficult sport. And now it's funny too. I mean, this is another podcast, but the social media aspect and the technology aspect and how it plays into the mental and the emotional sort of construct of the rider is fascinating too, and how you have to get that part right, because social media can be really, it can be great, but it can be detrimental too, so you have to pay attention to that. But yeah, so that's it with the equestrians. It's really cool.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. And I mean, you've worked in a variety of fields, from we've mentioned pro athletes to executives. Now, those are two sort of different things, but a lot of things overlap as well too. But I'm just curious, in your experience, who accepts the feedback and the things that you're trying to teach a little bit better? Is it the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, or is it the professional athlete? Because in both realms, there's a degree of ego, let's say, sort of involved with those positions inherently, right?
Well, there's the communication and the trust too. So if
Mhm.
you do have a really trusting relationship with both of them, then there's the opportunity for them to listen to you, and for you to listen to them too. The listening is always massive, right?
Yeah.
Being able to listen and have those skills. I mean, it's is it the biggest part of the business? Yeah, probably. It's the massive part of everything. Being able to really, really actively listen to somebody and actually hear what they're saying. So, um, Yeah, I would say both. Like the definitely the CEO is more complex, or the executive or the business piece is more complex, mainly because there's more moving parts. And there's more skills, I would say, required from a perspective of the social skills and the leadership skills and all these skills that have to be built. It's more complicated, it's more complex. And you could arguably say there's more at stake too. You've got, and there's so many more moving parts. Like you've got the stakeholders, and you've got the shareholders, and you've got the board, and you've got the employees, and you've got customers, and you've got all these pieces that are sort of in your mind that you have to kind of work around and figure out what's best. So yeah, it's complicated. So I would say, like, that's why my background in executive coaching and working in the corporate world was incredibly valuable to bring to sort of the sports world, because it's technical, it's very technical, it's more complicated, it's more complex. There's just so much more happening. And then you can bring that down. So when you work with a CEO, they're at the top of the food chain. Like these people have worked their way up, and they're at the top of the food chain. And you've got to be really, really good at that level, because you're talking about culture, and you're talking about, the emotional climate of the organization, all these things that are critical that you have to get right, because that's the way the machine really runs if you get those pieces right, especially the culture piece. So, an athlete just typically has to worry about themselves and performing well themselves. I've got to go out today. I know what I have to do. I know I have to get it done, and this is what I'm going to do. But the CEO has to focus on so many more different pieces, or the executive has to focus on so many more things.
Right.
And you have to be aware of those things when you're coaching. You have to be aware of those things, and that's why both have to be really good. But the executive piece is more complex, certainly, than an athlete or an entertainer that we periodically work with too.
For sure. Lots of moving parts there at the corporate level. And I mean, as someone who deals with the mental side of athletics and performance and all of that on a daily basis, like this is how you make your living. When
Yeah.
you're watching sports, like, do you have like a sort of a weird sixth sense of like, I feel like things are about to get, sideways here. Or you can sense someone kind of unraveling there that someone might not be able to pick up, like a, Jean Van de Velde at the British Open or Atlanta in the Super Bowl. Like, do you get that sense a little bit earlier than some of your maybe friends or family members of something's about
Yes,
to happen?
that's an interesting question. Sometimes you can, and sometimes you can't. I think certainly you can read things through body language, and you can see people. There's patterns too, right? You can see that. The book I just wrote, Kyle, is called Ride Big.
Hmm.
And the reason I called it Ride Big was because I was sitting with a bunch of pro equestrians at a table in Wellington, Florida. And during the winter, the best equestrians in the world gravitate to Florida, because there's what's called the Winter Equestrian Festival in Wellington, Florida. And we were sitting around one night watching this big class. It was a big show jumping class. I think it was a 5-star. And then when the riders come in, we were talking a little bit about them. And one of the riders asked me, they said, "What do you think of that rider? How that rider's riding?" And I said, "Well, they're riding big." And then they asked me about another rider, and I said, "They're riding small."
Hmm.
So you can see, based on how they approach the course, the body language, the risks they take, if they're hesitating, there's many different aspects and pieces to it. You can kind of tell if they're confident or not in what they're doing, and if they're trying to win or if they're trying not to lose. There's a major difference that you can typically see. And now, after doing this for many years, I can typically see when a rider comes in, or when an athlete comes in, you can see if they're really trying to win and moving forward, or trying not to lose and being a little bit cautious and a little bit less proactive. So anyways, that sort of answers your questions right there. The equestrian example sort of answers your questions, and that's why I called the book Ride Big, because it's a style. It's
Hmm.
a style of competing. It's a style of, in this case, it's a style of riding, and it's a confidence style. That's what it is. It's all about the confidence, and you're riding like you have a chance to win. So
Yeah.
you're trying to do that, right? So Yeah, definitely. So John Van de Velde, man, that was crazy. And this weekend was the women's Open Championship at Carnoustie. So a
Mhm.
lot of people were talking about that actually on the 18th hole when Van de Velde had that drive sail way off to the right into the burn, and then maybe made some bad decisions. It's always hard to second guess people, but it looked like he made a bad decision. But when he dropped the ball, he had a terrible lie. So, could he get it over the burn or not? He didn't get it over the burn. He ended up, as you remember, probably knocking it into the burn for the second time, and ultimately, didn't win the tournament, unfortunately for him. But yeah.
Yeah, no, hindsight's 2020, right? It's easy to relitigate.
Armchair quarterbacks. Oh
Exactly.
yeah, armchair quarter. It's really easy from your living room, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, John, we could go on for another 2, 3 hours here with the amount of topics that we could deep dive into. But I mean, for those who want to get more information on either your business or the services you offer, or pick up a copy of your book, like where are the best places to find you or get more information about your company?
Yeah, probably, Kyle. And thanks for allowing me to do that. I really appreciate it. And thanks for doing what you do too. This is a cool service you're providing for people, right? They're listening, they're learning. So I think that's really cool what you're doing. The podcast format is really great. From a perspective of finding me, you can find me at just my name, John Haime, HAIME.com. So a lot of the things are there. Um, yeah, the books, I wrote two books actually. I wrote the first book in 2010. It's called You Are a Contender. And it was a popular book in the business coaching, and it got into the sport community too a little bit, right? It's a book on self-awareness and a book on performance. So we wrote that one first. And then I wanted to write this book, working in equestrian, working in the other sports, but working in equestrian too, the last 6 or 7 years, I wanted to write a book for them because I didn't think there was a lot in the sport in that area. So we wrote that book. It's called Ride Big, and it can be found everywhere. I wrote it for a publisher in the US called horseandriderbooks.com, but it's on Amazon and it's on all the, chapters, Amazon, all these different areas. But basically, people can find me at the website. If they ever have a question or anything, yeah, ask me. Like I love to interact with people. And if people want to know something, just go to the website, click on contact or whatever and ask a question anytime.
Beautiful. Well, John, we might have to have you back on for another future episode because there's so much more we can dive into. But we appreciate you taking the time. For those that are listening, go and check out the website and the books that he's got out there available today.
Thank you, Kyle.